Now, my question is this. There's a really interesting interview, which I know you're familiar with him and Camille Paglia.
Mm-hmm.
And he says in that interview that men cannot win an argument with very aggressive women because the way men tend to work things out is physically. I mean, at the very end, there's negotiations, and hierarchy and power struggles, but then men do resort to something physical, and with a woman, if you ever do that, then you've lost. So he's like stuck, and it reminds me of something Melanie Phillips wrote about societies with a very dominant and controlling woman that collapsed because there isn't a way of sustaining that. You know, I was thinking about all of that during the movie. What are your thoughts on it?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, that was obviously one of the controversial statements that Jordan made that, you know, a lot of people were really critical of. I think it was also in a tweet, if I'm not mistaken, as well as
actions. What was considered to be controversial?
Oh, the statement that he made about that. I don't remember the exact wording right now, but that, yes, that men can't, that are kind of stuck or can't win with sort of crazy women, I think he put it, because you don't have, and I don't think he was even referring to the fact that, you know, it's the fact that men have the availability of violence that kind of keeps things from getting violent in a way. It's just like the threat.
You know, it's like a man knows with a man, they kind of contain each other because it's let's not do it.
Right. And that isn't the case with men and women. And so that was the statement he made. And, you know, a lot of people, I think, look at statements like that from Jordan as interpreting that as a type of misogyny, or that he's sexist, or that he's a violent person. But, you know, he isn't any of those things in reality, in the way that I witnessed him in different scenarios over the last 4 years. But he likes to really think about things deeply and talk about things in a way that is sometimes uncomfortable and going to those dark places. And people love him for that, and people hate him for that. But I also, I think for the people that are so put off by him talking about the dark side of things, it makes me kind of skeptical of them to think that, well, you know, are they so pure that, you know, they've never had a dark thought in their lives? Like, I think it's very brave for him to actually come out with and say those things. And of course, you have to be careful when you do that, because it can capture the interest of people who do have dangerous intentions. So there are risks involved with that, but it's also what people to really think. Mm-hmm.
My personal reading is that Dr. Peterson is humbly acknowledging the darkness and the power of the shadow self. What fascinated me, and I had seen this in the trailer, I wasn't quite sure what was going on, and then I saw the movie, is his paintings in his home. You want to just tell people about that? Because to me, that kind of could fuel, if someone has negative thoughts and feelings about him, that could fuel their sense of being right and his being wrong.
Right.
You know, we've got him, nailed him.
Mm-hmm. So entering Jordan's home, what you would see was literally wall-to-wall painting. You could barely find, you know, wall between all the paintings throughout his home. And much of it is Soviet era artwork that he purchased on eBay. And it's original paintings. And yes, he loves the irony of like the, you know, communist paintings for very little. So he's interested, one, in the artwork itself and the style of the artwork, but he also is interested in his home generally, the kind of artwork he has. There's the Soviet era artwork, but then he also has a lot of Mexican humanist paintings and a lot of indigenous artwork, mostly done by Charles Joseph, as well as some other paintings. And he sees it as kind of this battle between darkness and light, good and evil, chaos and order. This is a theme that recurs throughout his work, and he wants to be reminded of how bad things can get. His life's work has been about studying genocide and the Soviet Union, and psychologically what leads societies and individuals to participate in things like that. So this is something that he's thought about a lot.
Even from when he was a young teen, it seems.
Exactly. And it sounds like there's something that he couldn't help but study. It wasn't like, oh, let me pursue this interest. It was like it was weighing on him. It was something he had to understand. He couldn't.
Yeah, I think that his life has been a courageous commitment to look at that in the larger landscape and in his own personal landscape. I want to ask you about his 3-day conversation with his wife. At some point, what's his wife's name?
Temi.
I hope she's doing well. She describes how when they got married, they would begin a conversation and it wasn't resolved. And that conversation went on for 3 days. Mm-hmm. And I was stunned when I heard that, that someone who would have a 3-day conversation pushing forward through the clarification till there's resolution is someone who has to interact with people in what would be, bite-sized little bits.
Right.
And it's almost like, an hour lecture is like a tweet in terms of that scale,
Yes, absolutely. So in this interview with Tammy, I think she really puts into context Jordan's personality and persistence, and why is it that he would pick on this Bill C-16 human rights law? Why is he making a big deal out of these things that a lot of people see as minuscule or unimportant or kind of cruel for him to be picking on? If you look at this in the context of what Tammy was describing, how when in their early stages of their marriage, when they were kind of working things out and figuring out, how do we live together? How do we build our life together? And when they would get into these arguments, Jordan knew that if we don't resolve this and really go deep down to the bottom of this, it's going to be something that just keeps arising again and again. Mm-hmm. He's also a clinical psychologist by practice. He's always interested in getting to the very bottom, getting to the very bottom of things. So this is where she talks about having these sometimes 3-day long conversations where he wouldn't be able to let it go until they really got down to the bottom, resolved the core of the issue, and then they would be free from it and they wouldn't be having the same argument afterwards. And I think that is definitely the true spirit of where Jordan was coming from.
So do I. After hearing that interview with Tammy, I just felt, well, this decade or however long, let's say 3 years even, since the nature of his conversation changed, is just a long conversation. It's a 3-year conversation. It's a
right. There you go. That's a good way of putting
it. And I think it takes very broad shoulders and a courageous heart to be able to engage in that conversation over a very long period of time with the collective unconscious. It's kind of amorphous. It's not like your wife and you can go back to the kitchen table and talk about.
And especially when you have many Kathy Newman type interviews and the way the media was receiving not only what he was saying, but the spirit behind what he was saying. I think that's been very difficult for him.
Yeah.